Hi, I'm Don Dodge, and this is Google Root Access. Today, our topic is best practices for developing Android applications and how to be successful on the Google Play Store. My guest today is Reto Meier, my colleague. Reto's in charge of Android developer relations. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Reto, the number one question I get every day is, how do I get my app featured on the Google Play Store?
It's a common question, absolutely. With Google I/O coming up, I'm expecting to hear it a lot over those few days. I think it's an important question because I think that's fundamentally it's probably the biggest impact you can have on making your app more successful. Having a lot more downloads is getting into one of those featured spots. So it is a question we get a lot, and the answer is both simple and quite complicated. Really what it comes down to is building a great app, something which our merchandising team is going to be able to look at and think, this is something people are going to really love. This is something which is going to help promote our platform. It's going to help encourage people to buy Android devices and really think great things about what the platform can achieve. So that's the easy way. It's also kind of a cheap answer because it's like, okay, a lot of people have great apps. What do we need to do to go to that extra level? And so I think fundamentally there's a few very specific things you can do. And the first is to make sure that all of your Google Play assets are there. And that's kind of table stakes to the game. You need to have a great logo, great feature graphic, all of those assets which we ask for. If you don't have them in your Google Play listing, we can't feature you. It's just not possible. So that's table stakes to get into the game. Beyond that, we actually have two really great lists which we've recently published, which are best practices for creating quality apps and the same guidelines for creating quality tablet apps. And they're both available on developer.android.com. And what they do is they break down these checklists which tell you exactly what our QA teams are looking at in order to decide whether an app is viable for featuring. So if you go through each of those checklists and make sure that you cover all of those things, then again, you're in a great position. So if you have a great app with all the assets and you've gone through the checklist, then you're in a real position where you have a really strong chance of being featured.
Where are those checklists located? How do I find them?
So they're all on developer.android.com on the /distribute tab.
So developer.android.com/distributor?
Distribute.
Distribute.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have three sections on developer.android.com, one for developers, one for designers, and one for people distributing apps. And each has a huge amount of data to help you build the best apps you can, the best looking apps you can, and then distribute them as successfully as possible. And the distribute tab is, I think, something which is something of an undiscovered gem. There's a lot of data there which can help you really promote your app, increase your chances of being featured, help your chances of being successful in Google Play.
That's excellent. So there's a section for developers about best practices for developing. There's a section for designers on how to design great apps. And then there's a section for how to get distribution and best practices there.
Exactly. And I think in days gone by, developer.android.com was primarily for engineers, coding types like myself, who are more comfortable sitting in code. And over the years, as Android has developed into the ecosystem that it is now, it's become increasingly important to focus on those other things as well. And so as that has come more to the fore, we've put a lot more effort in trying to help people design great looking apps. Design is such a focus these days, I think, for really no matter what you're trying to build on whatever platform. Having that great design can be the difference between an app which a few people enjoy and which really is a breakout success. And then distribution is the sort of final cog in that wheel. You know, you have a great app, it looks great. How do you make it into a successful business? And that's the sort of stuff that we're trying to highlight and promote within the Distribute tab.
So let's assume that the developer has done a good job in developing the app from a technical perspective. Design is a little harder. That's like, I know good design when I see it, but I couldn't describe it. So how do you encourage people? What are some of the best practices in design?
Yeah, it's actually a really good point, and it's something which we really try and encourage. So what we have in the design tab is really a lot of information around what are the expectations around building an app which looks right on Android. Now, we don't want to get into a situation where every app looks the same. That's boring. That's not helping people create new and really interesting experiences. So what we focus on is providing a set of guidelines which will make your app look at home within the Android ecosystem, so that it will feel as though it's a part of the system and integrate well with all of the other apps running there. So what we really encourage is making sure that you don't break any of those guidelines. You don't institute any sort of user experience actions which are contrary to what people expect. So if they see, for example, if they see tabs on a screen, they're going to expect to be able to swipe left and right using a view pager to move that content. So if you don't do that, then you're introducing this cognitive dissonance for your users. They're going to expect something to work and it doesn't. Suddenly they lose confidence in their ability to use your app, and that makes them less inclined to use it. So we say, don't break the guidelines, create a consistent experience, but use that as a base and build on top of that to create something as unique as possible. We really encourage people to create apps which are a unique experience, which showcase the content which that app is delivering in interesting and innovative ways, which fit within the guidelines that we have.
While we're on the topic of design, is there a difference between designing an app for a mobile device versus a tablet?
I think that there is, and it's a really good way of looking at it as well. I think we try and encourage people to have, if possible, one distributable, which will work on a variety of different devices and work well. And in terms of implementation, often that's not too big a challenge. Where the real challenge comes in is creating something which works really well on phones and tablets and any other kind of form factor. And with a lot of different screen sizes, that can introduce a challenge in design. Something which works very well on a small phone may not work as well on a tablet. And so a big part of what we're encouraging developers to do today is take a look at their app and think about, how will this work well? How will this prevent a better user experience on a different device, particularly for tablets, because I think a lot of our developers have come to Android from that phone experience. And we have a bunch of tools within the framework to make sure that many phone apps will scale up and work reasonably well on tablets. But that's really just the first step. I think we're moving now to this next stage where we want them to really design their apps so that they work great on tablets. And Mint.com is a fantastic example of this, where they've looked to see, how do users use our app on tablets versus phones? And so they have, with one file which they distribute, two complementary experiences. So on the phone, you're using it to enter your expenses, all of the things which you're spending, all of the money while you're on the go. On the tablet, it's much more of a browsing interface. You're sitting down, you're looking to see, how have I spent my money? It's much more immersive, it has a much longer engagement. And they've seen that from sort of using their analytics, finding out how are people using the app on different devices, and then tailoring the experience to maximize what people are already doing on those devices.
So the difference between mobile devices and tablets, does it have to do with design and user experience, or are there actually, from an engineering point of view, different code that you have for one versus the other?
Well, that's one of the beauties, I think, of the way the Android framework works, is that from an engineering perspective, no. It's all the same sort of code, it's all using the same classes and methods and everything else. You're just having to implement another design. And wherever possible, using things like fragments, we've tried to make that as seamless as possible. So you can create different components which are just effectively arranged differently. In a lot of cases, a sort of first pass design for tablets is simply removing a layer of navigation. So where on a phone, you may have a list, you click an item, it drills down to more content, you click again, it gives you more content. On a tablet, particularly in landscape mode, you have a lot more screen real estate. So you can have the list on the left, you click on it and it'll have the detail panels on the right hand side. So you've got sort of more on screen, but each of those components are used in both layouts. It's just a matter of laying them out differently. Wherever possible, the Android framework tries to make that as simple as it can.
So a mobile device is obviously quite different than a tablet, but even within mobile devices, there are different manufacturers, different screen sizes, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that?
I think there's two factors to consider there, and one is we try and think less about specific form factors and more about screen sizes. So it's very similar to the way that web development has always worked. You basically figure out what layout is going to work and how small you can make it until you're going to have to rethink the user interface for something that's easy to use again. So much of the way we define it is to say that you need to have different layouts for different minimum screen widths. And that can take care of a lot of sort of the variation within particular categories. As well as that, we also like to think about, I can't remember where I was going with that.
How many applications have a good tablet design, or what are some of those best practices for tablets that make it so much better on a tablet and a different experience from the mobile device.
Right, okay, yeah, and that's excellent. It actually prompts me to remind me what I was going to say as my second point, which is responsive design is a big part of that. So you want to have something which scales well, so that for any sort of variation between sort of different screen sizes, you're going to have an experience that looks right. Things expand in the right places, you have white space in the right places, you don't end up with strange empty things or really small fonts or anything like that. When it comes to creating that great tablet design, well, for a start, we have, again, a best practices guide on developer.android.com for creating great tablet apps. And that talks about things like making sure that you don't have excessive white space, that you don't have text which is too small, that you have big enough touch targets, all of these sorts of things. And that's all, as I say, detailed more specifically on developer.android.com. If you are building for tablets, definitely recommend going through that list. Again, this is what we look at when we're trying to figure out, is this an app which we think is designed specifically for tablets to highlight in different collections on Google Play and those sorts of things. In terms of specifics, or I should say, those are sort of the engineering specifics more generally, we're looking for, or we've found that users tend to find tablets in a more engaging way. So phones will be, take it out of your pocket, spend a couple of minutes, put it back in. Tablets are more, using casually on a couch, lying in bed, whatever else, where you're spending, half an hour at a time. It's almost an alternative to a laptop in many ways, sort of an easier to deal with laptop. So it's creating experiences which work within that context. So richer user engagement, longer periods of time. You build your phone apps expecting that users are going to be interrupted constantly by the people around them or notifications coming in, just the day-to-day. On tablets, it's a great platform for things like media consumption, and you can design your app using this same sort of philosophy, like something which people are going to be able to sit down and interact with for significant periods of time.
You mentioned touch points just a minute ago in design, and I this morning had an app where it was a HTML5 app. It looked great on my laptop, but when I went to use it on my phone, I had to check boxes, and they were so close that I couldn't check the right box. So is that what you mean by touch points and how to design around those?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things which we've found with modern smartphones and tablets is that people use their fingers to interact. And this is a feature. It's wonderful. I had a phone back in the day which had a stylus touch screen. And that finger experience is just a much better way to go. But that does mean that everything you need to click needs to be about the size of your finger, which on Android is 48 dips, which is device-independent pixels. So on every device, 48 dips is the right amount of space for your pointer finger to touch things. And so that's a really important sort of point, both in terms of how big do buttons need to be in checkboxes, but also how much space do you need to leave between different touch targets. So checkboxes is a great example. You want to make sure when someone clicks something, they're clicking what they want to. As soon as someone does something they didn't want to, again, they lose confidence in themselves, in the app, they're less inclined to use it. I've always found that we tend to be quite deeply engaged in the tech world, right? So the way we learn things is you press all the buttons and see what it all does. Most people, that's not quite how it works, and a lot of people, and remembering that smartphones have been expanding so quickly that it's people who used to own feature phones are now sort of entering into the world of smartphones. Maybe not as comfortable with computers as some of us sort of more techie people are. They sort of approach it with this feeling that if they press things in the wrong order, it's going to delete everything and post nude photos of them on the internet. Not that there are any, but somehow. And so when you're dealing with people who have that sort of hesitation around using technology, you really need to do everything you can to remove that fear, to make them feel comfortable, so that anything they press, it does something. It does something predictable, it does something non-destructive, it does something they can take back if they weren't happy with what they did, and really try and make them feel more comfortable with the technology.
Another question I get every week is HTML5 versus native app. And that example I used earlier was an HTML5 app that worked great on a laptop, but when I used it on a phone was unusable.
Yes.
So it's a big debate, but where do you come out on that?
That's an interesting topic, and in fact, I gave a presentation with Mike Mahamov from the Chrome team a couple of years ago at Google I/O, which tried to tackle this exact topic. And it was interesting. It was a lot of interest. A lot of people want to know the answer. And fortunately or unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. I think in an ideal world, and I think Google's a good example of this, you do both, and you make sure both are really good. I think these days it's short-sighted to think that you can have a web presence which, if someone goes to on a browser, doesn't look good on whatever device they happen to be using. On the other hand, there are certain advantages to building native apps which just can't be done on web browsers right now. So if you're building apps which have media content, which you want them to be faster, smoother, feel more a part of the device, native apps create an optimal experience. I'm on the Android team, so obviously I don't exactly have a completely independent perspective on this, but I think that you can create a much better, richer experience you building a native app for Android. But I think it's also worth investing the time and effort to make sure that your mobile experience is fantastic on every platform as well.
Right. So native apps have a few advantages. One is your logo for the app appears on the phone screen, whereas if you're a website, then you have to navigate to it. It doesn't appear on your phone.
That's
right?
true.
So that's one. Another is native apps can send notifications or messages to the top deck, and HTML5 web apps can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? Those are two obvious ones. Are there others?
I think a lot of the biggest advantages you get from native sort of fall into two camps. The one is just the advantages you get from being closer to the metal. You don't have an additional interpreter between you and the device hardware, so things can just be faster and smoother.
So performance is better.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right? If you're running on top of a browser, that's just another app, another layer between you and the hardware which needs to do processing and rendering. So if you really want to have that buttery smooth, beautiful animations, everything happening quickly, you're going to be better off trying to have as little between you and the hardware as possible. The other side is more the ability to be much more deeply immersed within the ecosystem on the device. Android was designed right from day one to make sure that each app was carefully sandboxed for security reasons, but then have a bunch of really good controlled ways that you can then share information between apps. So things like sharing, so you can share something from within your app and take advantage of every other app on the device, which is able to share that kind of content. Those sorts of advantages, I think, are quite significant. The ability to get into the content providers of the app, to be able to launch maps, all of those sorts of things, which really deeply embed your app as part of that whole ecosystem of the device, is something that you can't do if you're sort of within your own sandbox on a browser.
Or if your app utilizes the camera on the phone, or utilizes the GPS or the accelerometer or other things. Those are some examples where you'd want to go native versus HTML.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting point because I think it's sort of the most visible thing right now, but also the thing where I think the web is going to catch up. The advantage is if you're building sort of natively, then you have access to every sensor as soon as it's available on the device. So we introduced a barometer a couple of releases ago, and obviously if the hardware's in there, you've got APIs to be able to access it. I think what will happen over time is that the more sensors become standardized, then HTML5 is going to start introducing web APIs to access that, and cameras cameras, GPS, and compasses. Three of the things which have already sort of made their way into the HTML5 spec. I think we'll continue to see that as those sensors get more and more standardized. But again, if you want to use something new, then you're going to have to use the native.
So HTML5 is catching up and being able to access these different features on the phone. But your answer is you need to do both well.
I think so. I think if you really want to be successful, if you want to have an app which is able to reach the biggest audience possible, and I think in terms of success, that's fundamental. You want to make sure that your app is usable by everyone who would be interested. You can't go wrong by doing both. I think the real challenge is figuring out which do you do first. And for me, again, I think build native is going to be able to have that smoothest, richest experience, and then have web as a backup to that for people who are running on different platforms, which maybe you don't support directly, or just have landed there from the web page rather than downloading your app from Google Play.
So let's talk a bit more about distribution. Of course, everyone wants to have their app featured. We talked a little bit about that, but a very small percentage can be featured. So what are some of the other things that you can do, like getting reviews? What are some best practices on getting reviews, and what should you try to do?
Sure. So I think, again, here the easy answer is build a great app that people love to talk about, which again is a cheeky answer, but a really important first start. I think beyond that, it's interesting to see, I think, the fact that Android has opened up, or mobile in general, has opened up this new world of opportunity for developers to be able to build apps and distribute them to a worldwide audience without having to go through a middleman. And so a lot of us aren't necessarily as experienced with like, okay, so I have this product, I've launched it in this worldwide marketplace, how do I get people to notice? And actually a lot of the old school techniques work really, really well here. Sending out press releases, using standard marketing techniques. So it's two of the most effective techniques that we've seen from developers is using, surprise, surprise, online advertising. So things like AdWords from Google or AdMob, or similar things from competitors, basically anything which is going to put your app in front of people for a relatively low cost. I think Google's done a pretty good job of demonstrating that online advertising works. It works pretty well, and it works really well for apps also. So I think that's definitely something to invest in. And I think that's fundamentally the decision you need to make. You can either go through free online channels, all the social media, all of the things which are really good practice there. And if you decide that, you know what, I want to take it to that next level, I really want to get eyeballs on there, then you need to consider investing money. And that means marketing, that means advertising.
I was using an app last week, and all of a sudden in the process of using the app, it popped up a screen and said, post a 5-star review of this app and click here. I didn't click it, but can you do that? Can you have a user automatically do a 5-star review?
So that's a good question. Happily, no, you can't. So it is something which a lot of developers have done, maybe not a lot, but it's certainly an avenue that some developers have taken to basically ask for a review within their app. And I think there's a couple of risks with that, and a couple of best practices and things to avoid. And the risk is alienating your users. If you ask them at the wrong time, then they may go and rate your app but not give you the rating that you were hoping for. Or they may just see it as a form of pop-up advertising. Even if the advertising is for the game you're playing, it's like, oh, you're getting in my face, you're asking me for something, I just want to play this game, to hell with it, I'm going to uninstall it and play something else. So you risk that. So one of the best practices is making sure that if you do it, you can't ask for a 5-star rating. That's actually against the terms of service for Google Play. So you can ask your users to rate your app, but you can only ask them to rate it and rate it fairly. You can't solicit a 5-star review. You certainly can't incentivize a 5-star review. So anything which says do this in order to get something, that's a no-no. Anything which says give us a 5-star rating, also a no-no. If you do choose to ask for an honest review, so one of the best practices is to make sure that you're not doing it too much. Not every time they open the app. Certainly not the first time, which is the oddest, right? You've just installed the app, you've opened it, it says, go and rate us in Play. I haven't used it yet. How can I do that? So do it sensibly. And I think one of the best approaches I've seen is that after you've used it for a while, after you've put in a few hours worth of gameplay or whatever else, at that point, you've got a user who uses the app or the game. They use it a lot. Presumably that means that they like it. And you haven't said anything to them beforehand. So you just ask them as a one-off at some point, hey, seems like you like it, maybe go and rate it. That tends to have the best response.
I've heard of developers who unintentionally or through an honest mistake got their app in trouble, where they incentivized someone to write a review, or they said, click on these 3 ads to do something, or they did things that seemed okay to them, but they got in the penalty box and had to dig their way out. What are some of those things that you call them no-nos, but really don't do this?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend to anyone who has an app in Google Play or is planning to launch one to really read through the content policies, the developer distribution agreement and the attached content policies, because everything there, we mean it. So these are the things which we have teams which will go through and make sure that the apps in Google Play are following those guidelines. So some of the things, I think the things which people find most surprising is they will assign their own assumed priorities to these things. So they'll see this list of things they can and they shouldn't do. And they'll go, well, this one is obviously important. this one doesn't seem like it's such a big deal. They're all such a big deal. There isn't really a prioritized list where some of them it's fine and you can get away with it and others are a definite strike. So make sure that you're complying with all of them. Some of the examples which I've seen most commonly, so I'll get asked a lot, oh, my app got suspended, why? I'm not on the team which actually will go through and do those analyses, and generally I don't even need to ask them. I'll just look at their Google Play listing and it'll be things most commonly like putting lots of keyword spam into their description, using competitor names, either sometimes it's to try and be deceptive, often it's not. They're just doing it as a sort of subtle form of keyword spam. Like, if you liked games like Angry Birds and Temple Run, then you'll love our game, which is, and that sort of thing. It's like, I can see you trying to be subtle. It's not working. Okay. In fact, you're doing two things wrong there. You really, if you don't have permission from a copyright holder to use their name, their brand within your name or description, then don't do it. And similarly, don't stuff a whole bunch of keywords. Don't try and weave all of those keywords into a clever paragraph because you think that's subtle. None of that works. It needs to be a good and accurate description and an honest description of what the app is and what it does.
Excellent. I've heard from other developers who their app got suspended and they don't know why. And I tell them, well, did you change anything? Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. Other times it's they did one of these don't do's, but it wasn't caught immediately. It could be a week or a month or some time later. So is that fairly common?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that Google Play works, it's not we don't pre-filter any of the apps which go into Google Play. As everyone knows, it's one of the features is you press publish, it goes through the system and it'll be up within sort of an hour or so, which means that there's always going to be a time disparity between anything that you're doing wrong and someone noticing it. Now, for a lot of these sort of more obvious content policy violations around inappropriate content, that gets flagged really, really quickly. Malware will get flagged even before it goes live. So most of that will be stripped out and removed before anyone ever has to see it. For some of the things which are a little bit more subtle, like keyword spamming or using competitor names, it's usually going to be when someone notices it, and either it'll be someone in our team which discovers it, or it may be by virtue of the fact that a lot of users are flagging it, or just that it's getting more popular. So it's definitely something which can happen either immediately or over time. Hopefully that time span is as short as possible.
How should a developer measure success when developing an app or on the App Store?
That's a really good question. I think it's one of the things which we look at internally as well, like how in the developer relations team we have to ask ourselves, we want to make developers successful. So what does that mean? How do we know that we're doing a good job at helping them? And I think it really comes down to sort of what is valuable to you. What are you trying to achieve by having your app distributed? Revenue is obviously one metric that a lot of people are using, but a lot of apps are free. They don't have any revenue to speak of, so what does success look like to them? And that can be anything from getting a lot of users, or it can be something like getting greater engagement. Maybe they've already got something successful and they're now on mobile and they want to make sure that their mobile users are having a rich, immersive experience, or they've got a static user base and they want to now expand into mobile to build up a whole bunch of new users. So really, I think it's important to figure out, why are you launching this app? What will it mean for you to be successful? How will you be able to sit back at the end of the day and say, that was worth the time and effort, we've done something worthwhile? And so I think the key there as well is, once you've made that decision, is figure out how to measure it. Revenue is really easy because you can just look at your bank account and see whether or not the money's coming in. Other things require a little bit more effort, particularly things like engagement, and then using tools like Google Analytics for mobile is a really great way of doing that. You can see how people are using your app. Are they doing the things which you want them to be doing on your app for it to be successful?
So write a great app, write a good description, get good reviews, get lots of downloads. In featuring an app, how important is number of downloads versus number of reviews versus do they use the latest feature? Is this something? So what kinds of things get more important?
I think pretty much everything goes into the buckets. When the merchandising team are looking to decide what they want to highlight, they're going to look at pretty much anything that they consider. And sometimes it's going to be timely, like Christmas is coming up, so we're going to be looking at apps which we think are going to be popular over the Christmas period, either Christmas themed or, through our own analytics, we've found these sorts of things are these sorts of apps are the ones which people are looking for at this time. Really it comes down to, in terms of downloads, it can be either. So obviously we want to highlight apps which are very popular, but at the same time we want to download apps which we think people will love and they just haven't seen yet. So download count isn't really a strong factor. Quality is. So you want to make sure that you've got a good high average rating. Something around the 4 stars at least, I think, is a good place to start. If you don't, find out why. There's nothing to say that just because maybe you launched early, got a few things wrong, got a lot of bad reviews, you've turned things around and started to improve it. We can see that as well. But certainly you want to be getting as high a star rating as possible through legitimate means, of course.
Cool. So write a great app, write an accurate listing, get good reviews, take advantage of new features, use advertising and other methods to promote your app. That's 5 topics. Are there any other things, or are those the major ones you really want to focus on?
I think those are the main ones. So I think the 2 other things I'd want to highlight is to really aim for app quality. There are hundreds of thousands of apps in Google Play, and you need to find a way to stand out. And the minimum bar for that is to really make sure that you have a good quality app. So really looking at the app quality guidelines, looking at the tablet app quality guidelines, and making sure that you've got an experience that works really well for all of the users across all of the different devices in the ecosystem, I think are the key things that you need to look at to be successful in Google Play.
So all of those guidelines are available on the Google Play Store or to the developers?
Yeah, they're all available on developer.android.com. Yeah, absolutely.
So developer.android.com is the place to go.
Where you want to go, absolutely. If you go nowhere else, that is the place. It's a hefty site, but there's definitely all of the information that you could need or want to be able to be more successful in Google Play.
So I've not read the distribution agreement, but is it a couple of pages or 20 pages?
It's a few pages. I think, yeah, a couple of pages. I think at Google we try and keep things in as plain English as we possibly can, and I think we've done a reasonable job there.
So I think you've suggested read that distribution agreement carefully, because every line there is important. You can't ignore one of these suggested don't do's, because it'll eventually hurt you.
Absolutely, and to be fair, I've spoken to a lot of developers, and we haven't had that many. I haven't had that many people who I've bumped into which have accidentally done something wrong. So it's definitely something you need to be aware of, but not anything which I think is there's nothing there which is too onerous or too unexpected. But as with anything, if you're entering into an agreement, it pays to understand exactly what you're agreeing to.
And on the other hand, it does make sense to spend the time reading the best practices, because they really can help you get distribution.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the surprising thing. It's like we have a cheat sheet on the site which tells you all of the things you need to do to build an app which people are going to really love and people are going to be engaged with. So the cheat sheet is there. So if you go through and you look at all of those details and you put those all into practice, you're really going to have an app which we're more likely to feature, which users are more likely to download and are more likely to keep on using and talk about in social media and give you high ratings, and it all really flows in on itself.
So that website again, where do you go to get all this?
Developers.android.com.
Developers.android.com.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us. And I hope you'll be with us next time on Google Developers Live. Thank you.